If you are looking for a way to make a child in your life smile, then you have to go to smilemakers.com and go through all of the must-have toys, stickers, and prizes for kids. You'll find everything you need to make the hospital, waiting room, or even your own living room more fun with games, crafts, and prizes for every occasion. I also have very good news for you because when you go to smilemakers.com and type in OnCall20, you will get 20% off with no minimum order required. So stock up on bundles made specifically for hospital procedures and therapeutic play, and make these already very affordable items more affordable with OnCall20. That's smilemakers.com and OnCall20 for 20% off your entire order.
You're listening to episode 105, How Child Life Specialists Help Kids and Families After Disasters. Hello, my friends. I'm so happy that you're here today. This is called a 12-minute talk, but truth be told, we go a little bit longer than 12. I think it's about 20 minutes that I'm talking with Cara Smith, she's going to give us her resume at the beginning of this, but she's just an amazing person, human child life specialist pioneer in our field, who gives amazing tips, not only for child life specialists, but for parents and ways to connect with kids after natural disasters happen, and actually any disasters and the pandemic and just all of these things. So short intro so we can quickly get to Cara.
Okay, so my name is Cara Smith, and I have been a child life specialist for 16 or 17 years now. I started out at Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City and covered a number of different units. Finally, my first official unit was the emergency room in our urgent child abuse center, and then moved into the bulk of my career in trauma and burns, and then ended in the pediatric intensive care unit, and then about 8 years of that, and the opportunity came along for me to jump into the academic world. And so I took that plunge and have been doing that for about 9 years now. And I do that at Missouri State University. So I'm a clinical instructor there full time, working to train child life students. And that's also freed me up to be able to do some stuff outside of the hospital world as far as child life is concerned, which is an area that I'm super passionate about, our field, opening our eyes to the possibilities that exist outside of the hospital walls. And so I've been able to do that currently working with the Police Athletic League, which is an organization throughout the country. I work here in Kansas City that brings together cops and kids to help build meaningful relationships and healing relationships in the community. So I work as a member of their wellness and resiliency team there, helping to meet some of the psychosocial and emotional needs of the kids, and also helping to do some training with the police officers and to provide a more trauma-informed approach to the great work that was already being done there. And then it also allowed me the opportunity to connect with child life disaster relief and really dive into that work, which I'm super passionate about. With them, I was able to go to the Bahamas after Hurricane Dorian and provide services there. And that's when I really opened my eyes were open to just how meaningful the skill set and the role of child life can be in the disaster world. And that then connected me back to them more officially. And I became involved in some of the local work that they're doing throughout the country as a program manager and helping to build relationships in the community in my city and in other cities. And then also became their trainer and educator. So now I'm mostly responsible for our webinar series, for our training that goes on to get people trained and ready to deploy, and just for general education about, for child life specialists with our role, and for others in the community about what child life specialists can do. So that's in a nutshell.
Oh my gosh. I'm just like, your resume is so long and so impressive. And there's a couple things that stand out to me. And I think one of the things I'm curious about I've been in the field about 12 years now, and your first 8 years were pretty intense, like working with victims of child abuse. I mean, any child life job is intense, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you're med-surg or you're the ICU or you're in an advocacy center, child life is intense because we're looking at everybody's emotions in the room. But I'm wondering, with burn and trauma and child abuse, Do you feel like around that year 8, it was like, okay, I think I need a mental health break from being exposed to that daily, and that's why your interest kind of opened up?
I definitely think it was burnout. I don't think it was burnout from the populations that I was working with, because I really loved that work. I think it was burnout with with just, how do I say this correctly? I think it was burnout with the administrative piece of child life, with
Sure.
all the other stuff that goes into being a child life specialist. And I also am finding, just as an individual, like when I feel like I've conquered something, I'm like, okay, ready to move on. And so,
Yeah.
there are some changes going on in our department and some shuffling taking place. I loved burn and trauma and probably would have stayed there forever, but we had to do some changing just with what was going on in our hospital. And so I've always been drawn to work with populations that may be a little bit more challenging, and I don't think that I've stirred from that. I think that's why I'm drawn into the disaster world and to some of the other worlds that I work with. So it's less about the work and more about all the other stuff that comes with being a professional that burnt me out.
Yeah. I think that's, that's so interesting. And thanks for sharing that with us, because I know that's not always easy to say in the field, right? It seems like the perfect thing. Like if we have the population we love and we're doing work that we love, like why can't we just keep doing it? But there are other factors that go into our decision for our personal life, our professional life, growth, and all of that. So I just love how you've evolved. So I don't have too much time with you today, so I really want to get into some of the work. I think we should do a whole other podcast on the police work you're doing, but I want to hear about child life disaster relief and what your experience was like in the Bahamas, being on the ground with children who had just experienced a major traumatic event.
Yeah, so it was my first time going, and I was with 2 other amazing child life specialists from Florida, and we basically were given this letter from the Ministry of Health saying, these are child life specialists, let them do their work. And so, we were directed, and there were wonderful people on the ground who provided our housing and transported us. But essentially, we showed up to the shelter with this letter in hand, and we're like, hi, your Ministry of Health says that we are allowed to work here. And got into this gymnasium, like a huge, is like one of their big, I don't know what went on there normally, but a huge gym. And it's just people to people, right? You're walking into this environment and, you show up with our backpacks and just like full of toys and items and whatever. And it's like all of a sudden you're just thrown into this environment and you're like, okay, I honestly don't really know what I'm doing. I mean, I've had training, I have an understanding, but until you're in that situation with like just the overflow of the sensory, people who literally have nothing and they're all just housed in this one gym. And then for some reason the kids look at you and they recognize something in you that you're there for them. And then all of a sudden it's just like kids running and grabbing and you're like, oh, great. Now everyone's going to be like, who brought these people into this environment to disrupt everything? So,
right. Yeah.
Honestly, it's the opportunity then to like go back to your roots of being a child life specialist and, creating that space for kids to come and feel safe and to make the connections that you have to in that environment. And the reason I share that is because I think that's the most overwhelming thing for people when they walk into this disaster world is like, there's a lot of uncertainty happening. There's uncertainty happening for the families that you're working with, but also for you to step into this world where you're like, what am I doing here? And that ability to like pause and take a deep breath and just remember, like connect to your core as a child life specialist and that you have the skills and abilities mostly within you. Like you don't even need your backpack. You don't need your stuff. Like the skills are within you to walk into this environment and create a safe place for kids to feel connected and safe and able to open up. So there's moments where I am sitting down and girls are braiding my hair and they're just talking to me about their experience. I didn't even ask. I never asked. One of the big things that we talk about in our training is like asking kids to talk about the stress of disaster immediately after it happens can actually cause more long-term damage. And so what we do is just create a space for child-directed play and child-directed connection. And then as they begin to open up and tell their stories, that's their signal of, hey, I'm ready to process this. And so, you're sitting there getting your hair braided, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, my house is gone. And the other kid is like, oh, mine is too. And this conversation just organically evolves, very similar to sitting around the playroom table in a hospital playroom and kids starting to talk about surgeries and whatever's going on with them. And then you're just there to hold space as they process through that. One story that I always tell is, I was sitting by myself, and there was a bunch of blocks in front of me, and all of the kids had gone to lunch. So it was like a moment of rare peace. And this 12-year-old boy walks by and kind of looks at me, and I was like, you want to play? And he was like, okay. And sat down, and my blocks were all I had. And so I was like, I don't know what he's going to do with these. So I just kind of sat, and we were just, kind of feeling out what was going to happen. And he started to build some stuff, and he goes, he said, this is a house. And this is my house. And I was like, oh, your house is yellow because that's the color of the blocks. And he said, no, my house was white and blue. And then he just started picturing this, like saying this picture for me of what his home looks like. And then he moved on to build the London Bridge. And I was like, oh, I thought we were going somewhere, but we're not, but I'll follow you. And then he came back and he started building a dock. And as he started building the dock, he started to share how, well, the dock actually isn't even there anymore. And then all of a sudden opened up to his story of his experience with the hurricane. And along the way, he would build the parts of his story. So he built the church that they had to run up to the church to escape the waters and the rains. And he wasn't scared of the water because he's a really good swimmer, but his mom is not. But he was really scared of the wind because it was just crazy. And they ran into the rafters of this church, and when they were up there, the water blew the doors open and the flooding came in. And then he built the boat that they were rescued on. And then the boat, he talks all about how it was a horribly choppy ride and how he didn't think the driver was very good and everyone was throwing up and what it smelled like. Just this really, trauma is a multi-sensory experience. And he was just giving me this multi-sensory explanation of his experience, and then brought me all the way to the shelter, and then talked a little bit about his dreams that he'd been having. And I honestly, Katie, did nothing. I was there and I was holding space and I was connected to his story, but I never prompted, I never asked. I just created the space for play to open up the opportunity for him to share his experience and process his story. And when he was done, and he got up and went on his way. And I never actually worked with him again, but I saw him a lot, and we'd share that knowing, connecting glance of hey, we're in this together. And that was his story, and that was his moment. And there's so many stories like that I could share, but for me, that was the most powerful one, because it was brought me back to our play basis child life specialist, created this space where, he was just given the opportunity to share and was ready to share and needed to share and connect that piece of his story. And when he was done, it was okay. Thanks.
Oh my gosh, that is so beautiful and so important. And all I can think of is I wish that every single child had a child life specialist to just, like you said, sit there and hold space for their story after going through something like that. We need more of us.
When Magic Mind creator James Bashara was diagnosed with a heart condition, his doctor made him give up a lot of his daily caffeine intake. So he worked with a team of doctors and food scientists to develop Magic Mind. Magic Mind has more benefits than just keeping you awake, though, and includes ingredients that help you feel less stress, think more clearly, and stay on task. If you want to join me in crushing your to-do list, then go to magicmind.co/childlife and enter code CHILDLIFE for 20% off your order. It's easy for parents and healthcare workers to feel burnt out and exhausted, so do yourself a favor like I did and get 20% off Magic Mind by going to magicmind.co/childlife and using code CHILDLIFE.
So when you're here and you kind of take that story and you're teaching other child life students, I'm interested in that, but I'd like to also hear about the parents that were around. And I'm sure some of the kids that you help support after disasters don't have parents anymore, and that's probably difficult. But what is that like, supporting the caregiver? Or when you're at these events, are you mainly there to support the kids, or are you having supportive conversations with adults too?
It's both. The thing about a disaster that's I mean, obviously parents are experiencing, the trauma of their children in the hospital environment. But in the disaster world, you're really working with community that's experienced trauma. And so it's, the support systems that are normally there for parents to rely on aren't necessarily there in this disaster world. And so the kids have experienced their experience of this traumatic event, and the parents as well, but then also the community and the people that you look to. And so it's just a greater level of, chaos in the environment, and parents are trying to find where are we going to stay? Their minds are on the physical and those primary needs of safety for their families, but at the same time, recognizing the emotional needs of the kids as well. And while trying to deal with their own stress and trauma and processing their experience. So there's a lot happening, and that can feel super overwhelming to you as a helper. We always talk, one of the doctors that we first met when we were in Bahamas talked about in the disaster world, the circle of concern. And, she made a big circle with her arms and her hand, or her fingers touching above her head, and then made a smaller circle with her hands and said, and this is your circle of control. So you have to recognize the difference between what you're going to see as your concern and what you can control, and focus your attention in the circle of control that you have, and trust that other people are taking care of the other spots that you're seeing around you, because otherwise it's too overwhelming and you're just like, what, I don't have anything to do. And so there is opportunity for us to connect with parents. Some of that for me looks like there was a vaccination clinic when we were in the Bahamas, because the kids didn't have their records to go back to. They were trying to get kids back to school, but their whole island had been destroyed, so they didn't have any of their records. And so a lot of the kids are actually having to be revaccinated to go to school because they didn't have proof that they were vaccinated. And so I was working in that clinic one day and was terrified 4 or 5-year-old who did not want to get her shots and was just screaming, and the mom was holding her in a comfort hold. And honestly, in that moment, it was me going and holding the mom's hand. And it was one of those moments where there really wasn't a lot that you could do in that moment. The kid was just really stressed. The family was really stressed. And so I just held the mom's hand and made eye contact with mom while mom was holding the kid. And it was that, probably by most child life terms, it wouldn't be something you'd walk away from and been like, oh my gosh, I'm a freaking amazing child life specialist. It was one of those I just am here in this space with you and it sucks. And afterwards, the mom got up with tears in her eyes and just gave me a hug and was so appreciative of me holding space for them. And I was at first I'm so embarrassed, oh great, all these medical staff are looking at you why are you even here? You're clearly not doing anything for this kid.
Yeah, they're if you're here, can you hold a hand?
Yeah, exactly. But then it shifted to being oh my gosh, I can't take away the stress of this experience for families. There's no, as a child life specialist, want to fix, and I literally can't fix because it's way beyond my ability to do that in the midst of this disaster. But what I can do is hold space for you to feel what you need to feel. And in this moment, it was her feeling terrorized and her mom feeling helpless, and me just holding space and being hey, we're here together with you in this. And I think that's mostly what it is for working with parents in that environment, is creating a space to just feel felt, to feel supported, to know I can't fix this for you, but I'm here with you. And recognizing that that's probably the same thing that they can offer to their kids in that moment, is I can't fix this right now. But I can be with you in it, and directing them to the supports that they have and helping to connect them and validating, and just, yeah, I mean, it literally is so overwhelming that a lot of times that's what we're doing with parents, is just hey, we're here, we feel you, this is a place to be safe. And then also, trying to support, it's one of those moments of supporting, of recognizing the parents' need to meet their own needs in that moment, to find their opportunity for a little sanity. And some of that comes with them trusting, leaving their kids with me for a little bit and stepping outside for a breath. Another story from the Bahamas happened to end up being with parents that I wasn't part of. It was another one of our teams that, the wind was really, really scary. All of the kids, when they talked about what was scary about the hurricane, understandably, the wind was what was scariest for many of them. So one day it was really windy in the gym. And so the child life specialist could tell there was a lot of anxiety. So they took the kids, and a lot of the parents followed outside, and they just got out their bubbles and held out their bubble wands, and the bubble wands with the wind created tons of, bubbles, obviously. And so the kids and the families and the parents were all just laughing and playing in the wind with the bubbles. And it was such a healing moment for everyone, for the scariness of the wind to be turned into something playful and fun. And it wasn't just for the kids. And I find that a lot. I saw that in the hospital. I saw that even more in the disaster world of like, oftentimes it's parents coming and playing with us and like their need to like process through what they don't have words for yet. And so maybe they're doing the art project, or maybe they're jumping in on the play and just letting that take place, knowing that there's, the parents have to process this somehow too. And they're so busy trying to care for everybody that's like providing opportunities to pause and let yourself recognize what you've been through and create that space for healing.
Cara, there's so many good nuggets right there that you just taught us. And, I'm thinking about the people who are listening to this podcast right now, our parents, child life specialists, maybe some healthcare workers, students. And while we may not be exposed to disasters, thank God, as much as some other people have, the two things that you've just said about holding space and not fixing are things that we could apply at any part of our life. Like I'm thinking about my own kids. I don't always need to fix it, but I can hold space, and just not having that expectation. So I think just exactly what you're describing in this disaster world is something that we can take and put in place right now. And I just love that. So thank you so much, especially for parents who feel like, they can't fix cancer, right? They can't fix this burn. They can't do that, but they can hold space and be there. And that is something that's impactful with the stories you've just shared. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you too, Katie, I don't want to keep talking because I know this is a short
I want you to keep talking forever. We'll just make it a long one.
The other thing I think, so when COVID started, we were really focusing on, we were getting a lot of like schools reaching out for help and families reaching out for help. We hear over and over again that kids are resilient, and absolutely kids are resilient. However, they're also more at risk for long-term negative effects of trauma from disasters than adults are, right? So they're resilient, but they also are resilient when they're given the tools to be resilient. So, it's not just like, well, yeah, our kids will be fine, let's just do whatever. It's like, yeah, our kids will be fine if we can support them. And so people were like, how do we support them? There's so much going on. And so we did a lot of research and found some research that identified 5 essential needs of kids after disaster. And we're like, okay, like as your brain is overwhelmed, trying to think of everything that possibly your kids are needing right now, let's simplify it and let's just focus on these 5 things. And the first of those is safety. So felt safety, right? So not just creating a safe environment, but helping kids to feel safe within that environment so their brain can respond and turn off all the bells and whistles of threat. So creating that environment where they actually feel safe and know that they're safe. Connection. So just taking those moments to connect. And that's obviously where the play piece is so important, but creating those relationships, helping kids feel connected to others around them. Nature is a piece of that as well, connected to nature. Opportunities for self-regulation. So that's where the not fixing it comes in for me, is like, I'm not here to make you chill out. I'm here to help you feel what you're feeling safely and feel connected to that. So providing opportunities for kids to regulate their emotions. And as a child life specialist or a helper in the field, I tell people that's the number one thing to work on before you go into disaster, is your ability to regulate in the midst of crisis. The fourth one is self-efficacy. So your opportunity to actually feel like you are contributing back to the healing of your environment. So how do we get kids involved in feeling like they have some control over what's going on and that they can help rebuild their community? And then the last one is hope. And we're really careful with hope that we don't provide hope before kids are ready for hope. So it's not coming in with a silver lining of like, oh, hey, at least you still have your family. But recognizing as kids start to reflect and become more hopeful of highlighting that, of being, oh man, yeah, like in the midst of COVID, right? When kids would be like, oh, I've been able to be with my family more. It's like recognizing, oh man, that is something good that came out of something bad, but not jumping them to hope before they've processed through kind of the struggle they've been in. So just bringing our minds back to those 5 things. If we can help kids feel safe, connected, regulate the big feelings that they're having, feel like they have some control or impact on the outcome of rebuilding, and then opportunities for hope, that's really the nuts and bolts of what we need to do to support kids as parents, as caregivers, as educators, et cetera.
It's like individually, like these concepts may seem very simple, right? But when you put them together, it's like the impact is huge. Like you think about safety as something that we just take for granted all the time, but actually feeling safe it's just, you're such an expert at what you do, and you're in the exact right place. And I can't wait to see what you do to help grow our field outside of the hospital and in disasters. And if there are child life specialists or students who are looking to, I guess, receive training or maybe come work for you, or is it a volunteer basis? Obviously, we can't predict when a lot of disasters are going to happen. And so how does that whole process work with people getting involved and learning more?
So all that information is on our website, cldisasterrelief.org, and I'm sure you'll link that wherever you can link that. But there's a Get Involved button. And there's also our webinars and training. There's so much information on there. Right now, we're doing a big push for training. So we're really doing our own child life disaster relief training. It's specific to child life specialists. It's not available for students yet because just child life specialists are who we deploy. And that's our big thing, is that child life specialists already have the skill set. They already have the experience working in crisis. So a big push for that training right now. There's one going on in January, there's one going on in February, and then there'll be a whole bunch more. So if you are interested in getting involved, training is where I would encourage you to start. And you can find that at our Get Involved link on our webpage. And then for students, there's lots of opportunities for students to get involved in child life disaster relief. This is probably not the most exciting for people, but fundraising is huge, and students are amazing in helping us fundraise. We can't deploy and we can't do the work we have to do if we don't have the funds to support the people who are going. So fundraising is a great way to do that. We also have a ton of opportunities for resource development, for education, for all sorts of, we've had some people create some really great resources this last year. We have some specifically right now that are disaster specific. So if you are in a community where there's been earthquakes, we have printouts of how to explain an earthquake to a kid, activities to do before and after, and supporting those. So all of those resources are on there, and we need people to help us develop in lots of different ways. And so those are just a few ways that you can get involved. But there's information on the website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Cara. And if people want to follow along with you, can they do that on social media or Child Life Disaster Relief? What do you recommend? How can people, besides just going to the website, see more of the work that you're doing?
Absolutely. Follow Child Life Disaster Relief. It's at Child Life Disaster Relief on Instagram, on Facebook. We have a LinkedIn page. We have a Twitter that we hardly ever use. So if that's your, I wouldn't go there for my primary source, and also on the website. I'm also happy with people connecting with me. My personal Instagram is not anything about child life, but it is a good way to reach me if you want to connect and talk about some of the work that's going on. So
awesome.
I
Perfect.
can send that to you too.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Child Life On Call podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor, and you can follow us at Child Life On Call on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please rate and review to make it easier for other families to find us. We have cute merch available at www.bonfire.com/store/childlifeoncall, and you can listen to more episodes and find resources at childlifepodcast.com.